KGB versus CIA, the covert chess game. The Invisible War. When people think of the Cold War, their minds immediately jump to mushroom clouds, missile silos, and the terrifying specter of nuclear annihilation. For decades, humanity lived on the edge of destruction, watching superpowers rattle their sabers with atomic fire. Yet behind this looming shadow of nuclear war, another battle raged, a quieter, deadlier struggle that would never appear on the evening news. It was a conflict fought in alleys and hotel rooms, in coded telegrams and whispered betrayals. This was the Invisible War, the secret chess game between the KGB and the CIA. Unlike conventional warfare, this struggle was not about tanks or planes, but about secrets. Who controlled them, who uncovered them, and who could use them to bend the world to their will. In Moscow, the KGB stood as the sword and shield of the Soviet state, an organization designed not just to spy on foreign enemies, but to crush dissent at home. In Langley, Virginia, the CIA rose as America's answer, a clandestine force tasked with containing communism through espionage, sabotage, and subversion. Both agencies became reflections of their nations. The KGB, born of paranoia and absolute control. The CIA, shaped by fear of Soviet expansion and a determination to protect the free world. The battleground stretched across continents. Berlin became the epicenter of spycraft, a divided city where agents crossed paths in shadowy cafes, where tunnels dug beneath streets carried both electricity and microphones, and where defectors risked their lives for a chance to switch allegiances. Every embassy could conceal an operative, every diplomat could hide a handler, and every ordinary citizen could be a potential informant. Yet this war was more than cloak and dagger drama. It shaped world history. The spies in the shadows influenced nuclear policy, decided the outcomes of revolutions, and tipped the balance in proxy wars. A coded message intercepted in one city could stop a coup in another. A double agent exposed in Washington could set off political crises in Moscow. The hidden moves of these organizations made the Cold War not just a clash of armies and ideologies, but a struggle of perception and deception. Fear was their greatest weapon. The CIA worried endlessly about moles within its ranks, convinced the KGB had infiltrated the heart of American intelligence. The KGB, for its part, operated under the belief that the West was always plotting sabotage and regime change. This paranoia drove both sides to extremes: elaborate counterintelligence operations, surveillance networks that blanketed entire cities, and psychological warfare campaigns designed to erode trust. What makes this story fascinating is not just the daring operations or high-stakes betrayals, but the fact that ordinary men and women, often faceless to the world, were shaping the fate of nations. A secretary in a Moscow office slipping documents to the CIA. A Soviet military officer secretly feeding information to Langley. An American diplomat compromised and turned into a KGB informant. These were the real foot soldiers of the Cold War, fighting in silence. The Cold War was not won or lost on the battlefield. It was decided in the shadows. The KGB and the CIA were not simply agencies. They were symbols of two opposing visions of the world, locked in a relentless contest where a single move could trigger catastrophe. To study their struggle is to understand the real heartbeat of the Cold War. Not in the thunder of nuclear missiles, but in the whispers exchanged in hotel lobbies, the coded signals on dead drops, and the endless duel of deception. As we step into this story, remember, the Cold War was not just about avoiding nuclear fire. It was about a different kind of warfare, one where silence, secrecy, and subtlety mattered more than armies. The world was a chessboard, and the KGB and CIA were its grandmasters, making moves in the dark, each waiting for the other to blink. Origins of the rivalry. The roots of the KGB-CIA rivalry can be traced back to the immediate aftermath of World War II, when two uneasy allies transformed almost overnight into bitter enemies. The Red Army had marched into Berlin in triumph. The United States had unleashed atomic fire over Japan. And the fragile coalition that had defeated Hitler now stared at one another across the ruins of Europe. In this tense vacuum, espionage became the weapon of choice. For the Americans, the creation of the Central Intelligence Agency in 1947 marked a dramatic shift in strategy. Washington had learned the hard way that without a centralized intelligence body, the nation was vulnerable. Pearl Harbor had been a devastating wake-up call. And as the Soviet Union began consolidating its grip on Eastern Europe, U.S. policymakers knew they needed eyes and ears everywhere. The CIA was born from this urgency, not merely as a collector of information, but as a tool of influence, designed to wage a shadow war against the spread of communism. Moscow, however, already had a long tradition of secret policing and clandestine operations. The Bolsheviks had established the Cheka during the Russian Civil War, a brutal organization tasked with crushing counter-revolution. Over the decades, this lineage evolved through the NKVD, the MGB, and finally, in 1954, the KGB, the Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti, or Committee for State Security. To the Soviet leadership, the KGB was not just an intelligence service. It was the very shield of socialism, the ultimate guardian against capitalist plots and internal dissent. Its reach extended from foreign espionage to domestic surveillance, from border control to ideological enforcement. What made this rivalry so dangerous was that it was never just about intelligence, it was about ideology. The CIA saw itself as the vanguard of the free world, defending democracy from the expansion of totalitarian communism. The KGB, in turn, saw itself as the vanguard of history, defending the Soviet Union from imperialist encirclement. Each side believed it was locked in an existential struggle, and every action the other took was viewed as proof of sinister intent. The late 1940s and early 1950s quickly became a proving ground for this new chess match. In Eastern Europe, Soviet-backed regimes crushed opposition movements, often aided by KGB operatives embedded in local governments. In response, the CIA launched covert operations aimed at destabilizing communist parties in Italy and France, funneling money, propaganda, and sometimes weapons to anti-communist forces. Both agencies were already shaping the political destinies of nations, without open war ever being declared. Berlin became the heart of the rivalry. The city, divided into sectors controlled by the Allies and the Soviets, turned into a spy capital where operatives from both sides maneuvered against one another daily. Every cafe, every train station, every border checkpoint was a potential stage for an exchange of secrets. In 1948, when the Soviets attempted to blockade West Berlin, the CIA played a role in sustaining the city through the famous Berlin airlift, while the KGB tightened its grip on East German intelligence. From the very beginning, the city embodied the larger conflict, a microcosm where two worlds collided, separated by ideology and barbed wire. The early years also produced legendary cases of espionage. The Cambridge Five, a ring of British double agents recruited by the Soviets during their university years, delivered priceless secrets to Moscow, shocking the Western alliance when their betrayal was uncovered. On the other side, defectors like Oleg Penkovsky, a Soviet military intelligence officer who would later pass critical information to the CIA, proved that even within the Iron Curtain, cracks could be found. This escalating duel created a climate of mutual paranoia. The CIA feared communist infiltration in its ranks, while the KGB launched relentless counterintelligence hunts to expose Western spies. Inside both agencies, suspicion became a way of life, with careers destroyed by whispers of betrayal and loyalty constantly tested by unseen enemies. By the mid-1950s, the stage was fully set. The CIA and the KGB were no longer fledgling organizations. They were now titans of shadow warfare, shaping coups in faraway nations, gathering nuclear secrets, and building networks of informants across the globe. The chessboard was in place, and the pieces were moving. The Cold War would never again be fought in the open. It would be fought in the shadows, one secret at a time. Tools of the trade espionage has always thrived on creativity. In the Cold War, the KGB and CIA turned innovation into a weapon, crafting an arsenal of tools designed to deceive, infiltrate, and survive in a world where every shadow might conceal an enemy. Unlike tanks and missiles, these were not weapons of mass destruction. They were weapons of manipulation, subterfuge, and silence. For both agencies, tradecraft was the lifeblood of operations. To the untrained eye, a park bench or a discarded soda can seemed ordinary, but for a spy, these could be dead drops, hiding secret messages or microfilm. A casual passerby adjusting his hat might actually be signaling an operative across the street. Every movement, every object could carry hidden meaning in this clandestine game. The CIA quickly embraced technology. Tiny concealed cameras were hidden in cigarette lighters, pens, and even belt buckles, allowing agents to photograph classified documents in seconds. The infamous rectal toolkit, designed to be hidden inside a spy's body to avoid detection, included tiny saws, drill bits, and wire cutters, proof that ingenuity often bordered on the absurd. The CIA also perfected audio surveillance, planting bugs in embassy walls, hotel rooms, and even shoes. One of the most famous Soviet counterstrikes was the Great Seal Bug, a listening device hidden inside a carved wooden U.S. emblem, gifted by Soviet children to the American ambassador in Moscow. For years, it silently transmitted conversations from the ambassador's office without anyone suspecting a thing. The KGB, for its part, emphasized human intelligence, the art of turning people into weapons. Bribery, blackmail, seduction, and ideological persuasion were standard tactics. Western diplomats and military officers were lured into compromising situations and then coerced into cooperation. Known as sexpionage, these honey traps were a KGB specialty, using charm and seduction as effectively as any bullet. The agency also deployed a vast network of informants across Eastern Europe and beyond. Ordinary citizens reporting on neighbors, colleagues, even family members. Fear and loyalty were both tools of control. At the same time, the KGB excelled in disinformation. Operation Active Measures was designed to spread rumors, forgeries, and propaganda that could destabilize Western societies. Fake documents, planted news stories, and carefully crafted lies seeded distrust in governments, movements, and even between allies. The CIA responded in kind, funneling money into newspapers, cultural programs, and political organizations to influence public opinion abroad. In this invisible propaganda war, words were as sharp as knives. Another crucial tool was spy gadgets tailored for survival in hostile territory. The CIA's engineers at the Office of Technical Services created devices worthy of any spy thriller. Umbrellas that could fire poison pellets, hidden radios disguised as everyday objects, and exploding briefcases. The KGB matched them with equally ingenious contraptions, from hollowed-out coins containing microdots to cameras disguised as buttons. These devices often seemed fantastical, Yet in the shadows of the Cold War, they were deadly serious. Cryptography, too, became a battlefield. Messages had to be encrypted, transmitted, and decrypted without interception. Both sides invested heavily in code-breaking and secure communications. The CIA relied on one-time pads, unbreakable codes when used properly, while the Soviets pushed the boundaries of clandestine radio transmissions. Every slip, a codebook left unguarded, a frequency reused, could unravel an entire operation. But the most dangerous tool of all was trust. Recruiting agents often hinged on fragile human relationships. The promise of money, revenge, ideology, or even love. A CI officer might spend years cultivating a Soviet diplomat, offering friendship before asking for secrets. A KGB handler might find a disgruntled American officer and slowly turn him into a traitor. These personal connections were as delicate as glass, and just as easy to shatter. Ultimately, the tools of the trade revealed the fundamental truth of the Cold War spy game. It wasn't just about weapons or ideology. It was about psychology. Fear, deception, and manipulation were crafted into weapons as potent as bombs. The KGB and CIA understood that in the invisible war, the smallest detail could tip the balance. A whispered word, a misplaced file, a signal missed in the rain, all could decide the fate of nations. This war was not fought with armies, but with shadows. And in the shadows, the tools of espionage became the most powerful weapons of all. The Great Spy Battles. If Berlin was the Cold War's front line, then espionage was its fiercest battle. No tanks thundered down the streets, no bombs fell from the sky. Yet every alley, every apartment block, and every checkpoint buzzed with the hidden war between East and West. Here, the KGB and CIA crossed swords in some of the most audacious operations of the 20th century. Each side determined to outwit the other on the ultimate chessboard of human intelligence. One of the earliest and boldest moves was Operation Gold, a CIA MI6 collaboration in the mid-1950s. Western intelligence secretly constructed a massive tunnel beneath East Berlin to tap Soviet communications. For months, they listened to conversations revealing troop movements, military planning, and political secrets. It was a triumph until it wasn't. A Soviet mole, George Blake, had already betrayed the operation to the KGB, who allowed it to run just long enough to avoid suspicion before exposing it in dramatic fashion. The tunnel became both a symbol of Western ingenuity and a reminder of how deeply compromised their efforts could be. The Berlin Wall itself, erected in 1961, became the ultimate backdrop for spycraft. Smugglers, defectors, and double agents risked everything to cross its barbed borders. The Glienicke Bridge, later nicknamed the Bridge of Spies, witnessed prisoner exchanges that seemed torn from the pages of a novel. One such exchange in 1962 saw Soviet spy Rudolf Abel traded for downed American U-2 pilot Francis Gary Powers, an iconic moment of Cold War theater where the stakes were measured not just in human lives, but in propaganda victories. Beyond Berlin, the rivalry spilled into crises that threatened global annihilation. During the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, intelligence became the decisive weapon. The CIA's aerial reconnaissance discovered Soviet nuclear missiles on Cuban soil, sparking a confrontation that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. But in the shadows, it was a KGB insider, Colonel Oleg Penkovsky, who provided the crucial intelligence confirming the Soviet arsenal and guiding Washington's response. For a brief moment, the chessboard tilted dangerously close to checkmate, and only a mix of spycraft and political brinkmanship pulled humanity back from the edge. The 1970s and 80s brought new battlegrounds, especially in the developing world. Afghanistan became a crucible for covert warfare. The Soviet invasion in 1979 ignited a CIA campaign to funnel money, weapons, and training to the Afghan Mujahideen. The KGB, in turn, unleashed its Spetsnaz units and intelligence networks to crush resistance. This shadow conflict drained Soviet resources, fueled American resolve, and ultimately played a role in the collapse of the USSR. It was a proxy war fought with rifles and rockets on the surface, but beneath, it was the intelligence agencies pulling the strings. Espionage battles weren't always fought abroad. In the United States, the FBI and CIA spent decades unmasking Soviet spies operating on American soil. One of the most damaging was Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer turned KGB mole in the 1980s. Ames betrayed the identities of dozens of American assets in the Soviet Union, many of whom were executed as a result. His treachery revealed the devastating human cost of this silent conflict, where a single betrayal could erase years of work and countless lives. Meanwhile, the KGB had its own humiliations. The defection of agents like Vitaly Yurchenko and Oleg Gordievsky exposed the weaknesses of Soviet counterintelligence and handed the CIA priceless insights into Soviet strategy. Each defection was both a propaganda coup and a psychological blow, further intensifying the cycle of suspicion and retaliation. The great spy battles of the Cold War were never settled in one decisive clash. They were a series of blows and counterblows, victories tainted by betrayal, and defeats softened by resilience. Every operation revealed the precarious nature of intelligence work. Successes could unravel overnight, and failures could become triumphs in the realm of perception. What made these battles so enduring was their invisibility. Unlike traditional wars, their victories were rarely celebrated, their defeats seldom acknowledged. The KGB and CIA fought in the shadows, their moves hidden from the very public they claimed to protect. And yet, these silent duels reshaped the Cold War at every turn, deciding crises, shifting alliances, and, in the end, pushing one superpower toward collapse. The Endgame: Collapse and Legacy. By the late 1980s, the great covert chess match between the KGB and CIA was nearing its end. Decades of rivalry had reshaped nations, toppled governments, and brought the world to the brink of nuclear catastrophe more than once. But the same forces that had fueled the Cold War, paranoia, secrecy, and economic strain, were now eating away at the Soviet Union from within. For the KGB, the once mighty shield of the socialist state, the final moves were already being played. The CIA had long understood that the Soviet Union's strength was not infinite. Through surveillance satellites, informants, and economic analysis, Langley's analysts concluded that Moscow was buckling under the weight of its massive military spending, inefficient economy, and unpopular foreign wars. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, once intended as a show of strength, had become a quagmire, draining resources and morale while fueling CIA-backed insurgencies. In the chess metaphor that defined the rivalry, the Soviets had overextended their pieces, and the board was beginning to collapse. Inside the USSR, cracks widened. Reformist leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced policies of glasnost openness and perestroika restructuring, loosening the iron grip the KGB had maintained over society. While intended to modernize the system, These reforms unintentionally weakened the very structures of control that sustained the Soviet state. For the CIA, this was a seismic shift. American operatives exploited the new openness, gathering intelligence more freely than ever, while Soviet citizens, emboldened by reform, became harder for the KGB to suppress. The KGB, desperate to maintain control, grew increasingly erratic. Hardliners resisted Gorbachev's reforms, staging the August 1991 coup attempt, during which KGB elements played a central role. But the coup collapsed within days, symbolizing the agency's loss of both public legitimacy and internal unity. The very force that had once projected fear across the globe now appeared powerless against its own unraveling system. The CIA, observing from afar, recognized the significance. The queen on the Soviet side of the chessboard had been effectively neutralized. As the Soviet Union dissolved in December 1991, the KGB was formally disbanded. Its successor agencies, most notably the FSB and SVR, inherited parts of its legacy, but none of its once formidable aura. For the CIA, the moment marked not only a victory, but also a profound transformation. The enemy it had been created to oppose was gone. The Cold War was over, and the great covert chess match had ended not with a nuclear strike or a decisive battle, but with the quiet collapse of one side's will to continue playing. Yet the legacy of this shadow war continues to echo. Many of the methods perfected during the rivalry, disinformation campaigns, covert funding of political groups, cyber operations, are still in use today. The playbook of the Cold War has simply been adapted for the 21st century battlefield, where intelligence, influence, and covert action remain as vital as ever. Modern conflicts in cyberspace, election meddling, and proxy wars bear the fingerprints of lessons learned during the KGB-CIA struggle. The rivalry also left behind a cultural imprint. Spy novels, films, and television shows captured the intrigue and paranoia of the era, turning figures like James Bond and John le Carré's George Smiley into archetypes of the Cold War spy. Behind the fiction, however, were real men and women whose lives were destroyed or forever altered by the game they played. Their sacrifices, betrayals, and victories remain hidden in archives, classified files, and fading memories. For the CIA, the Cold War cemented its role as a central pillar of U.S. power, a guardian in the shadows. For the KGB, the collapse was both an ending and a rebirth, as its legacy flowed into new Russian institutions that continue to influence global affairs. In the end, both agencies proved the same truth, that espionage is never about winning or losing in the traditional sense. It is about survival, adaptation, and the constant reshaping of reality in pursuit of national interests. The covert chess game may have ended with the Cold War, but the board is still set. The pieces may look different, the strategies more modern, the battlegrounds increasingly digital, yet the essence remains. Nations still play in the shadows, still manipulate, deceive, and strike where the light does not reach. The rivalry between the KGB and CIA defined an era, but its legacy defines the world we live in today. Now, the silent chessboard. As the Cold War faded into history, the world remembered its nuclear arsenals, its political speeches, its towering walls, and their dramatic collapse. Yet behind those iconic images lay the quieter, more elusive struggle. The covert chess game played by the KGB and CIA. It was a contest that never produced a clear victor on the battlefield, but rather a series of silent wins and devastating losses played out in shadows most citizens never saw. Unlike armies marching across borders, espionage rarely leaves monuments. Its victories are found in whispers, its defeats buried in classified files. A successful operation might prevent a war no one even realized was imminent. A failed one might cost dozens of lives, their stories erased from the public record. The true legacy of this hidden conflict lies not in medals or parades, but in the invisible impact it had on the balance of world power. The covert duel was as much psychological as it was political. Each agency sought to project confidence, while secretly riddled with doubt and fear. The CIA boasted of freedom and democracy, but sometimes undermined both in its covert interventions. The KGB claimed to defend socialism, but relied on surveillance, repression, and fear to sustain its power. Neither side could fully escape the contradictions of its mission, and both left scars that still shape geopolitics today. And yet, in studying this rivalry, we see not just institutions, but people, agents who risked everything, defectors who gambled with their lives, and double agents who played the most dangerous role of all. Some believed they were shaping history, others were simply trying to survive it. Their choices, made in the shadows, altered the course of nations. The chessboard itself has changed, but it has never been cleared. Today, intelligence agencies continue to battle across new domains: cyberspace, economic influence, psychological operations, using methods inspired by the Cold War's lessons. Fake news replaces forged documents. Cyber intrusions replace wiretaps. Proxy wars are still fought far from the public eye. The pieces have evolved, but the game remains the same. A struggle for advantage in a world where open war is too dangerous, yet peace too fragile. For some, the end of the Cold War marked a triumph of one system over another. But the covert chess game teaches a subtler lesson: that power in the modern world is not only about armies or weapons, but about information, perception, and manipulation. The KGB and CIA understood this better than anyone. They proved that the future would be defined not only by who controlled the strongest military, but by who controlled the narrative. So, when we look back at the shadow war between Moscow and Washington, we are not just revisiting history, we are reading a manual for our present. The strategies of deception, the reliance on secrecy, the cultivation of fear and loyalty, these remain with us. The board is still set, the game still played. Only the names have changed. As we close this journey into the shadows of the Cold War, one truth remains clear: the silent chessboard never truly disappears. It shifts, adapts, and waits for the next players to make their move. And somewhere, in the shadows, the game continues.